the discussion short. So thanks for coming. This is our Center for Education and Innovation Lunch and Learn series. We do about 2 or 3 a semester. Sometimes we're talking to each other, and sometimes we have a speaker in. And this time we'll be talking to each other with Dave here, right, Dave? And I'd like to start just by introducing Dave. And I want to read his bio because there are things, I hope it doesn't embarrass you, Dave, but I wanted to tell you what I learned. There's things about Dave I didn't know, and I've been working with him for a few years. So this is Dave Franzeb, and I might have pronounced that wrong, and I apologize. He's actually the project manager and also the social science researcher for the Student Experience Project at UNC Charlotte. He'll be talking about that project, so I'm not going to introduce the project. I'll just be introducing Dave. And he's a ABD, which many of you know to be all but dissertation, in educational research, measurement, and evaluation. This is a PhD program at UNC Charlotte. His dissertation uses a sequential mixed methods approach to investigate the impacts of adaptive learning platforms on removing equity gaps among marginalized students in Gateway STEM courses. I didn't know that, and I find that fascinating, and I'd like to learn more. He joined Niner Nation in 2012, and he's been a part-time lecturer in the Department of Sociology, where he teaches research methods and quantitative analysis. Many of you know Dave from the Student Experience Project, and if you don't, you're about to learn more about that, which I think is fascinating because, first of all, it's multi-university, multi-course, and it's looking at the impact of very small changes in what we do in our classrooms that have big impact on students who are typically underrepresented in STEM gateway courses. So with that introduction, I'll hand over to Dave.
Yeah, thanks, Mary Lou. I appreciate it. Again, thank you for letting me be here. And if you guys have questions, I think when I share screen, I can still see most of everybody, but if you have questions and I miss it, somebody just unmute and yell at me. So I'm gonna go ahead and share my screen with you. I think I can, I'm just expanding this a little bit. All right, great. So today I want to talk to you about the Student Experience Project. And again, my name is Dave. So I'm the project manager and social science researcher for the team. And today's presentation is kind of small lifts, big gains, and thinking about what the faculty Avengers are and how we got where we are today. Before we begin, I would like to kind of start with a quick land acknowledgement. And my RA is Michelle Stanley, and she's part of the Kahari tribe, and she has helped me write a land acknowledgement that I'd like to share. So before we begin, I'd like to acknowledge the indigenous peoples of all the lands that we are on today, with a special thanks to Michelle Stanley of the Kahari tribe for allowing me to share some of her words. While we are meeting in a virtual space, I would like for us to take a moment to reflect and acknowledge the importance of the lands which we all call home. It is our collective responsibility to recognize that colonialism and genocide of indigenous peoples continues to this day, and to protect, honor, and support indigenous nations' histories and current efforts. Standing in solidarity with these nations can include donating time and money to indigenous-led organizations and movements and amplifying the voices of indigenous people. Please consider a few of the indigenous organizations located on this slide to support and activists to listen to and share their stories. I also ask that we take a moment for a reflection to acknowledge the harms and mistakes of the past and to consider how we can each move forward in reconciliation, collaboration, and improved safety for all indigenous peoples. And I'll make this slide available if anybody needs the links or anything, but these are just a few that people that I follow and really have learned a lot over the past couple of years. And kind of moving on to what SEP is. So SEP is a team network of 6 urban serving universities putting research to practice to make large impacts on the student experiences in higher education. So on kind of the left half, you see the 6 institutions. We have UNC Charlotte, Colorado State, UC Denver, Portland State, the University of New Mexico, and the University of Toledo. We have support from the Coalition of Urban Serving Universities, the CTC, so College Transition Collaborative, Education Council, Association of Public Land Grant Universities, SHIFT, PERTS, used to be based out of Stanford, now they're a standalone, And our funding sponsors through the Rates Foundation, which is also an offshoot of the Bill and Melinda Gates grants. So this is kind of, we've been doing this for about 2 years now, and this is kind of the group of 6 universities and our learning partners that have helped build the SEP and kind of implement across the different institutions. So SEP began kind of in 2019. So the fall of 2019 was our first call to action to try to start looking at understanding what was happening across all 6 institutions. We began by kind of just surveying different faculty, students, and staff on campus to get a climate survey, which then turned into, we had 21 faculty kind of regroup after all the first informational meetings we had to start thinking about interventions and change ideas that we could start incorporating into classes to try to make small changes. So on our campus, we had the 21 faculty, and then we started beginning workshops in the fall of 2019 with the small scale implementation and testing out some of these ideas in the spring of 2020. As you remember, last spring we had the start of the COVID impact and moved to remote. So a lot of the implementations kind of, got put on the back burner. Moving into the fall of 2020, we had 12 faculty Avengers that stayed on to the program to do a larger rollout and do a bigger pilot. We also included 51 faculty in what we refer to as SCP Lite. These faculty were across the university and mostly teaching the Prospect for Success courses or the top 40 classes. So this included a lot of other Gateway STEM courses and then LBST and Gen Ed courses, where the SCP Lite folks only focused on a few interventions focused on the beginning of the semester, whereas the 12 faculty Avengers were picking 4, 5, 10 different interventions throughout the entire semester. Where we are right now in the spring of 2021, we currently have 53 faculty Avengers with some whole course implementation. So we're looking at change ideas that are happening in all of the Bio 1110 courses. We have Math 1103, 1241 and 1242. We have Stats 1220 and 22. And then we are trying to pilot some things with some ITSC folks in the 1212 and 1213. And I want to say thank you to everybody that's on this call right now that is helping out, because I've gotten a lot of feedback, and I'll get to this at the end of it, but how we're going to kind of restructure it to make it a little bit, I don't want to say smaller, but a little bit more, what's the word I'm looking for? Just a cleaner package, we'll say that. Oh, and this isn't going to do my transition. So this is something that I like to do with my own students, and I've done it with faculty. But I kind of always like to think of, what do you think of when I say higher education? And a lot of times these are some of the common words and things that I hear from folks. We hear about libraries, we think of dorms, giant lecture halls, quads, 18-year-old students and fresh out of high school. And then the next question would always be, so what do you think of when I ask you if you know what your UNC Charlotte students look like? What are they? In the past, I still hear a lot of people think about that 18-year-old freshman straight out of high school coming in, and kind of like that traditional idea of what a higher education might be, or your own past experiences. But one of the things that I think is kind of interesting that a lot of people don't know, when you say higher education, we might have this biased opinion that it's the 4-year institution, it's the big campuses, public or even private. But 52% of the current enrollment in higher education is actually in the community colleges. So there are more students enrolled in community college than there are in 4-year institutions across the US. When we start thinking more specifically about UNC Charlotte, so this is the data from fall 2019 through spring 2020. We were sitting at just under 30,000 last year, or this current year, we actually increased to just above 30,000 undergrad students. But then we kind of look at it, the new freshmen, we had 3,600 new freshmen, we had 28 new transfer students. But then we kind of start looking down, adults over the age of 25, we have 7,400 students over the age of 25 as a student right now. So our, 25% of our student population is over the age of 25. So not that typical 18-year-old coming directly out of, high school. And we also have, almost half of our student body coming as a transfer student from those community colleges. So one way to start thinking about it is maybe our own personal experiences or biases, opinions, thoughts about what higher education is might not actually match who's here at UNC Charlotte as a whole and who's in our classroom. So it's just one of those things to kind of think about, maybe looking at the student population, looking at your class roster to kind of get an idea and start thinking about the different backgrounds that these students are bringing into your own classroom. Another fun fact, so this is data from 2018-19, they still haven't updated it, and this is coming from NESE's data. Looking at the first time enrolled students for 2018-19, so out of the about 6,000 students, 3,700 of them were new first enrolled in higher education. Out of that, 74% of them were on some form of financial aid, with 57% of them on grants or scholarships, and we had 32% that were Pell eligible. And then 53% of those students were taking some sort of not public loan, so an educational loan. This isn't taking into anybody that's taken out a private loan. That data is not captured, but it just kind of shows that our students have a high need to attend college. And then the other thing to think about is those students that are kind of in that murky middle, just above Pell eligibility, but at the same time might not have the finances to really support themselves to be a full-time student or even to pay for all the necessities that they might need as a student. So just kind of having those two in the back of your mind, thinking about who the students are and their needs was one of the big things that kind of really helped shape the SCP project. So our goal is in the Student Experience Project is to test and implement and scale research-based approaches to transform the college student experience so that every student feels like they belong and every student has the supports they need to succeed. And how we reached that was a focus on things that we can control and present to our students by removing a negative identity threat cues presented to our students. And how this all began. So the Faculty Avengers, this is kind of three of the biggest kind of constructs that they kind of focused on. The first was looking at threatening social cues and identity threat, understanding it, and then working on different ways that we could target and attune our messaging to signal social belonging and a growth mindset in our syllabus and our emails and any kind of communication that we send out. Thinking about how we have feedback to foster engagement and growth throughout the semester, and it changes, depending on the type of course you have and the size of it. And then the ongoing nature of it was cultivating supportive and inclusive environments, but also using real live data to make changes and understand what's happening in your course to try to increase the social belonging, growth mindset, and some other constructs. This one here is the constructs that we are trying to focus on throughout the SCP project. So we're looking at, do students have trust and fairness with their faculty? What is their institutional growth mindset? Do they see it changing? Their own identity safety, their self-efficacy, social belonging, and their social connectedness. And I'm not going to get into the theories behind everything, but if you ever want that, that's kind of when we start doing training, if anybody wants to join. But I was going to share some data that we have from the fall with everybody. So this is across all 6 institutions. And this data is coming from the PERTS Copilot Ascend survey that we use. And what happened is over the 6 institutions, I believe there were 70 instructors across all 6 institutions that did survey cycles at least 3 times to collect change in perceptions of students throughout the fall semester. So this data is kind of showing the most recent. So this was the final survey that the folks, can you see my mouse cursor? Okay, good. This was the final survey. And then over here is the changes in positive ratings since the first survey. The green here is positive and it's statistically significant changes. And if we had red, that would be a negative, but it's statistically significant. The ones that are in black, there just wasn't statistically significant changes between the student populations. As a cohort, we had some positive movement with the identity safety, and then we had it with social belonging and social connectedness. The one thing I will say is, so you can see here in the social connectedness of the students across all 6 institutions was extremely low. Starting off in the fall, that was the one thing that kind of shocked everybody, was how low social connectedness was. In the spring, when we piloted this number was already started off in the 50s and 60%, so kind of across. But then it kind of started making sense. The pandemic was happening. We were 4 or 5 months into the nationwide shutdown. Everybody was starting to feel isolated. So throughout the semester, I guess the good thing here is we were able to make some movement and remove some of the equity gaps that we were seeing in the student populations with some positive growth by just small changes that faculty were kind of focusing on. When we look at just UNC Charlotte faculty, we see a little bit higher positive gains. So here in identity safety, we had an 11% growth among all of our students that participated in the 12 different courses. And then it breaks it down between male and female, and then structurally disadvantaged by race. So minority students versus white, and then the financially stressed students. One of the things that we noticed that if you kind of look right here, the financial stress students were lower across the board and consistently on our campus as well as other campuses, which started us making us understand and realize that financial stress is one of the key driving issues behind a lot of the different identity threats and other social cues that these students are having. So we try to spend a little bit more time thinking about how things that we are doing in class might be a financial burden on our students. One good example is even on a Zoom call requiring students to have a camera turned on when not all students have a camera, and or having a virtual background because not all camera systems have the ability to have a nice background on it. So that was impacting students on their social connectedness, their identity, because they weren't able to afford the right technology for a certain class. So just little things like that, kind of thinking about, started making little changes throughout the semester. When we look at a little bit more specifically here, so we had a couple of instructors that had some major gains. And this one is on sense of belonging in the course. And this was from some biology courses. So we set up kind of a community of practice style where we got together once a month to kind of talk about what we were seeing in our reports and try to make more changes happen. The biology team really kind of took off with this, and we're meeting on a much more regular basis to really kind of focus on making changes that they saw. So this was only on the social belonging scale. And you can see that across these biology folks, they had double-digit increases in social belonging. And I have some list of different interventions that they were working on and doing. But this is something that's kind of like some major gains in an intro to bio course where the students may or may not be biology majors. These are all classes that were 100+ students. And being able to make small changes to make some big gains by the end of the semester. Identity safety in those same biology courses, we see again some double-digit increases here. And by the end of the semester, identity safety was pretty high. The students felt safe. They felt like they could be who they are, whether that be gender representation, their race, you name it. They were feeling much more comfortable within these kind of classes. Some other cool things that we saw was social connectedness. So if you remember, let me go back to this one, kind of across all 6 institutions, social connectedness at the end was only at 27%. Within these biology courses, they were able to kind of get social connectedness up quite a bit. One class was still only at 30, but then we see 54 and 48%. And a lot of the things with this was just kind of focusing on how they were doing Zoom breakout rooms and thinking about getting students to engage with each other and changing up, individual projects or assignments to make it more group work. And it was just small changes they were doing to help increase that social connectedness among their students in a virtual setting. I feel like I'm going super fast. Does anybody have any questions yet? No? So the next steps, what we're thinking of, so in the past, and I'll show you kind of a slide which got everybody overwhelmed in the spring. So this is a list of all of our interventions, and we have a Canvas site that is kind of a pick and choose model. And what we've really learned this semester is it's overwhelming. And I forgot that most of the Avengers we had early on helped build these interventions. and help test them. So they were already comfortable and familiar with them. So it was a lot easier for them to look at them like, oh, I'm just going to do all of them, or I'm going to do, 7 of the 10. And what we're going to kind of do is pull it back just a little bit, where we're going to do an intro sometime in May to really understand what identity safety is, and how that impacts our students. And then work on, it's called a syllabus workshop, but it's learning how to attune our language and think about how we can set up a class that is very student-centered and student-focused, and how our language might be interpreted against a marginalized student. The other things we're going to look at throughout the summer is kind of thinking about how we can start increasing our diverse representation within our lectures, within our syllabi, with a focus on early alerts, why we use them and how we can use them, in partnership with wise feedback. And then the other intervention is a belonging story, and then how we can use belonging stories and boosters throughout the semester to do increases in all those 7 different constructs. How we measure it through continuous improvement is using the Copilot survey. So all the data you saw up here, you would survey the students 3 or 4 times in the semester, and be able to share that data back with your students, as well as learn from it and make changes in the classroom. Some of the other things we got here. So these are just a couple comments that I've received from students. My favorite one, I guess, was one that I got via email, and it's in this bottom green one. So this semester has been hard in and out of our class. Having my professor ask these questions and make changes has really made me feel valued. It's one of those things, the students, they notice that we're doing things and trying to make changes in the classroom. And the goal of this, in a perfect world, would be to remove all equity gaps for all of our students and make everybody get an A. In a perfect, that's impossible to happen. But if there's a chance that you can impact one student to make them stay in the major or to continue on, is kind of the ultimate goal. And I think just asking these students these questions and showing them data to make changes in your classroom is one of the most impactful things that we can do. Wow, I went really fast, and I apologize. And I had time to kind of get into some of the nuts and bolts of everything, but what questions do you have?
Yeah, so thanks, Dave. I think that's really great. And having that data there, showing the differences in the different, like in biology and then across all the universities, has been really helpful. I think we could just open it up to see what people want to talk about here. We're in the College of Computing. I think we do have a problem in our classrooms here, if not specifically in our classrooms, we certainly have it in the profession. So whatever's happening here is leading to a profession that is strongly skewed towards the dominant white male professional. So I just wanted to open it up here and see what people who are here right now experiencing in their classroom, and if you've done any of these SEP small lifts, what your experience was. Jennifer.
Yeah, sorry, I haven't. I'm really interested in doing it, but we mostly, sorry, I'm in bioinformatics. And it's primarily it's a graduate program. We do have some forays into undergraduate, a lab class and a few things like that, but they're not nearly as impactful as the larger classes that you're talking about in those basic areas. But I still feel really strongly that some of these things, we have graduate students who are definitely impacted by financial issues and identity issues. So how do you think these strategies would work if I sort of signed on and tried? Would it help your program at all, your research, if I tried to do some of this with graduate classes?
Yes and no.
Okay, which ones yes and which ones no?
I don't know if it would help with our research question, because it really is aiming at that STEM gateway for undergrads to keep them. But and the other kind of bad thing is if your class is super small with most grad classes, if you do the Copilot, it aggregates the data to groups of 5 or more. So if you have less than 5 in a group, you're not going to see any of the data, which in the fall, I had a class started with 30 and down to 16 by the, add drop. So it's like my data, I didn't have anything anywhere. I just had like the overall what the class was feeling, couldn't see changes to see what was working, what wasn't. So that does make it a little bit harder to make kind of big changes or to focus on something. But at the same time, being a part of the group and seeing the trends across campus, I could assume by knowing my all that those trends were probably about the same. But that being said, even if you can't do the survey, I think anecdotally, the information I've gotten from especially the SCP Light folks was it's important information, things they never thought about. And you might already be doing a lot of the things, but it's being more mindful about it and actually talking to the students about why you're doing something.
Right. Well, I think there might be things I haven't thought of. So what I think of, I do try to apply, and sometimes students don't respond the way I expect them to, which is, it's an unintentional, it sounds condescending, or they feel picked on rather than helped. And I'm assuming some of your experiences would help me sort of smooth that out and make it more effective. But I don't want to waste, your time and energy when you clearly also have research things going on. So, interest doesn't necessarily qualify you to, horn in and take resources either.
Actually, I want to jump in here because one of the things that we were thinking about when we asked Dave to come and talk here in CCI is that even if this project participation in this project or not awareness of this project doesn't contribute to the research in the project, it does help your students. If you were to take on any of these or even just one of them. On the one hand, we were very interested in the research and the data collection, but on the other hand, we actually want to change what happens in our classrooms. I mean, that's the ultimate goal, not the research, but what happens in the classroom. So I think if Jennifer, if you wanted to be added to the Canvas course that has this information, it also has the research behind these small lifts, why they work, and guidance in how to use them. As you said, you're probably doing many of these, but are you doing it right? It sort of gives you that confidence that I am doing it right, because look at what's behind these suggestions. There's a lot of research, a lot of thought, instead of just me sort of making it up intuitively. I think it would be great if people were to adopt some of these techniques, even if it doesn't contribute to the research. Harini, you had your hand up and KR had a question in the chat. Let's go with Harini first.
I actually had a comment to just add on to what Mary Lou said. I teach ITSC 3146, which is not technically a gateway course, I guess, in our curriculum, but I am still part of the SCP, and I'm doing some of the co-pilot and other interventions that Dave mentioned. So I'm not sure how the data from my course contributes to the actual research, but it has definitely helped improve the student experience in my class. So, and Dave, maybe you can answer whether this course also contributes to the research. I don't know if it qualifies, but I believe it was mostly 1,000 and 2,000 level courses that are considered gateway, right?
Yeah, we did you join the community in all the classes?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, no, we're including that too, but we'll break it out because we have it listed like it's still a STEM course, so we're looking at all of them together, but then the gateway ones they're going to look at a little bit different because we're also going to track. I was going to put this in there, but the next kind of steps with the data is we're partnering it with transcript data to look at DFW rates with a giant asterisk because the fall was not normal. But at the same time, look at the student progression to see if we can see any changes or equity gaps reducing as students progress through majors or through STEM, or do they change out? So we'll look at that kind of more in depth later. And eventually the idea is this project would expand to every class in computer science, right? Like everybody is focusing on this. So it's building on top of every class as they progress. So yeah, the data is still part of the research, but there's like 15 groups.
I'm going to pull up KR's question that's in the chat where he asked if you could define identity safety.
Yes, and I'm trying to find, so I don't misspeak on it. Oh, here's a good one. Okay, I'm gonna see if I can share my screen one more time with you because Screen two, share. Oh, now you guys just see yourself, don't you? Do you see the PowerPoint again, this one?
Yes.
So identity threat it's called social identity threat, states that structures and cues have different values and meanings and within the setting. And within it, there are neutral, positive, or negative cues that students can experience, or anybody for that matter. One of the examples that's given is, a threatening structural cue could be the restrooms and like the physical layout of a building. So this one, you can see that these are where the restrooms would be. There are 4 male restrooms and 1 for women in the building, and how that might be interpreted for all the female students or employees in that building. Anecdotally, there was a professor in geography that used to grade the ACT or SAT exams. And the building that they were in was an old engineering building, I think at South Carolina. And she was the only female grader on the written portion of it. And the only bathroom that she could go to was on the other wing of the building in the basement, because the building was built in the 40s, where it was predominantly men that worked there. But it's just one of those things, like, where are bathroom locations, and how is that already kind of putting a student on edge or having that negative threatening cue that they don't belong in this building, they don't belong in this field, this major, or whatever it may be. Another one could be, I forget what, I think it's in engineering. There was a term that they used to use for connectors, where it was the master and the slave, and how that might be impacting, African-American and Black students in class to be hearing that nonstop in their field of study. Like, so it's those small little things like that that you might not think about, but how it could be interpreted differently and create this negative on edge interpretation for the student or the other person. Even like, thinking about class lecture slides and stuff like that, how you might be presenting data or information, and even as simple as the names that you use in all of your examples. When I used to write my test examples, it was always Mary and Dave, you do X, Y, and Z, but changing up the names, how that might make students feel more like they're in the data and they understand it. So that's kind of what identity threat is in a nutshell. It's just kind of the cues that are around you and how they're interpreted and how they might be a negative, positive, or a neutral. Does that kind of make sense?
Yeah, it does. If you show some of the data, I have the impression that in data you collected, you follow the gender, and the numbers between all and gender seem to be very similar to me. Yeah, this type of tables. You see over here, we are seeing actually even more positive results from women than from men. And I think one of the, our data is actually showing significant differences between men and women. And that's because of the lower proportions. And I'm guessing if we went by race, we would see similar effects. I actually have something on the screen, so if you stop sharing,
yeah. This is across multiple classes. I have some, but there was only a few like computer science courses, and I didn't want to have their data up, so that's why I focused on biology. But yeah, each discipline was kind of I don't want to say all over the place, but there are different struggles within kind of each of them. Our math courses this semester, I can tell you, like, they're having some gains, but it's very small gains. But it's also, they have a lot of gen ed students in their courses right now, so it's not even math majors. So it's another kind of hurdle kind of sitting on top of them with the self-efficacy. Like, I'm bad at math because I'm bad at math, but they don't realize some of the small things they can do in class to make changes to see. But yeah, you would have individual data for your students to see, like, if you're having a major difference between your gender or your race, to think of other interventions or way you can kind of focus individually but then we can also look at it holistically.
That's right. And so this is one view. Look at the number three. And this is for all the students. It's not based per class. This is a survey of all the undergraduate students. Questions like, I feel like an outsider, or at times I feel my success has been just luck. These are the results for female population. So I feel like an outsider in computing and so on. Now, if I switch, it's not the perfect view, but if I switch gender to male, you will see that from 2.5, it went down to 2.2. I feel like an outsider, right? So fewer males feel like an outsider. At times I feel my success is part of luck. Fewer males feel that their success is part of luck. So I do think that majors do have different dynamics, and it would be very interesting for us to get some specificity maybe for our majors, and our majors would correlate with engineering more than with biology from that point of view.
Yeah. No, I wholeheartedly agree with that. And I mean, I would love to have large groups of a lot of computer science folks doing this so that we can see if we can get more data to see, do these interventions, will they work well with, computer science? We've had a couple folks in engineering 1201 and 1202. There were two folks in the fall that did the SCP Lite, and we're able to see some pretty big gains in some areas, but not near what biology saw. Biology was kind of this outside beast, and they actually did a presentation. The faculty got together, did a presentation at our last convening of 3 very specific interventions they've really focused on. So one of them was they got rid of office hours and called it coffee shop. And it wasn't even talking about course content anymore. It was just an invitation to talk about anything at the university. And, they didn't have a whole lot of students show up all the time, but those students were still giving important feedback. They felt like they were trying to make the effort, and they saw gains kind of across all of the 2 sections that really focused on that. So my hope is to get more faculty that are interested in trying some things, computer science engineering, to see what's working and not working. But also kind of thinking about even just looking at your syllabi and seeing, do you have language in your syllabi that's going to make a woman feel like she doesn't belong in your class or in that major? Hopefully not, right? We don't have that kind of language, but even I'll anecdotally tell you, like when I first started teaching, I borrowed syllabi from some tenured faculty, and I read things and thought, oh, this is hilarious. I'm going to put it in mine. Tanya's really laughing because I think she knows the faculty I took it from, who's no longer here, but it was, I thought, funny information, but every single one of my students, like a year later, I asked what they thought about it, kind of getting this content analysis looking at it, and they're like, oh my God, I thought you were a fill in the blank based on that one part. Like, it was so standoffish and that's not who you are. And I'm like, I thought it was funny. And it was on email communication. And it wasn't funny. And it was one of those things that the identity threat, what it was doing to my minority students specifically. But they just felt like, they didn't belong in my class and all that kind of stuff. So it's like, I just got rid of it and changed my, put a better etiquette email slogan thing in there. But then it's like, practice what you preach. And yeah, so the more engineering, computer science folks we can get in here, I think the better our data will be on that. We have a lot with the natural sciences, and we're getting more with math. Some of the other things, like LBST folks out there, are finding similar situations where, because the students aren't seeing the connection of that LBST course with their major or intended career, so their engagement and self-efficacy is much lower than some of the major courses that we have. So then kind of really realigning kind of what they're teaching and how it's important in nursing and whatever, fill in the blank. And they've already started seeing some small gains kind of changing in the self-efficacy and that social connectedness, where they're meeting other majors or possible majors and talking about things. LBST, so that's the liberal studies courses. So part of the gen ed. Students are required to do 4 of them. So it's one of those things like, nobody wants to do them. They're
Okay, sorry. I was just, you can tell I only do grad students. I knew I was going to show my ignorance, but
Oh, you're fine.
it was getting used enough. I started to get frustrated.
So what about the people who are here who have tried some of these? I see a few of you there and tried them in our classrooms. Do you have any thoughts or recommendations for people who haven't tried it yet? So I know Nadia, you've tried some. Barty, you have. Harini. I don't know, Tagi or KR, whether you've tried anything or whether you knew what the project was before you showed up today.
So yeah, I tried a lot of these interventions. I think my favorite, or the ones that I felt that I really had to think about and change, is the syllabus, the language in the syllabus. There was a lot there. And then not really the social belonging, but the wise feedback. I felt really the wise feedback was something that, you know, was very helpful to students versus, right, it's like focusing on here what you did right, you know, and take, you know, anchor what you can do next based on what they did correctly. And that gave them a sense of confidence that they can, okay, I can do this, versus no, okay, I didn't do, you know, just focusing on what they did wrong. I felt that was a good change.
You know that you mentioned the syllabus thing, and I just want to bring this up. I teach our graduate teaching seminar in CCI, and this is a course for PhD students to learn about teaching in computer science. It's required for some of our scholarship students, but we're starting to require it for all PhD students before they are a TA or instructor of record. And I do this syllabus thing with them. And that syllabus exercise where we look at two syllabus, one with growth mindset language and one without, and we compare them and talk about it. And then I ask them what they thought about it. And two pieces of feedback are particularly interesting. One is they could not believe that there actually were people who wrote a syllabus with the not growth mindset. When they looked at that, they said, people say that stuff. And like they couldn't believe you would actually be, you know, have that attitude that would make people feel so terrible. So I had to say, yes, this does actually really happen in a lot of our gateway courses. They're considered weed out courses. They're considered survival of the fittest. If you can't make it through this, you don't belong in the degree. But the other thing that was interesting feedback is they said, but who reads it? Do students read the syllabus? And so there was that question. It's only effective if the students actually read the syllabus. And do we have any sense, I don't know, Dave, whether you've asked this question, how many students actually read the syllabus?
I have not asked that. But what, I mean, and I always just kind of share my thing with it where it's, I mean, so with that being online, I do like a video walkthrough where I really touch on it. And then do a syllabus quiz to see if they have read it. And usually my syllabus quiz is, I mean, it's pretty easy, you know, but it is one of those things that, and I mean, within my syllabus, I've SCP-fied it, like it is growth mindset and, you know, and it is kind of interesting when anecdotally students have emailed me after they've done it, like, oh, this is great. So I just want to clarify, like, this is how, you know, I'm like, yeah, like, so I know that my students are reading it, but they kind of have to. But again, yeah, if a student isn't reading the syllabi, but at the same time are they not reading it because they're used to the ones that are like, you can't do this, you can't do this, you can't do this, you can't do this. But if I'm late, you have to sit there and wait 20 minutes, but you can't be late, you know, like, so it does depend on kind of how you're presenting the language. The wise feedback that Nadia was talking about is one of my favorite interventions because to me, it's something that starts from day one and carries out the entire semester. And just thinking about how you're phrasing your statements to your students, how it changes their mindset of, I can't do this, or I should withdraw, to, oh, I just need, you know, a little bit more help here, or this is what I messed up on, it's an easy fix. Another example is, or I guess I should say is, this data is not given to your chairs. It's not part of any evaluation. The data, the whole point of it is for you to make improvements that make for your course. And I have the Big Brother effect where I can see your course and then, look at it across the entire cohort, but it's only so we can learn and have conversations. But the good thing is with this data, what we're finding is other things that we are not necessarily, measuring or trying to connect with. So an example is a biology course right now. The self-efficacy, social belonging, everything dropped 30 and 40%. And it was kind of like, what happened? She's like, what did I do wrong? With my exam scores were still good, couldn't figure it out. And then we started realizing 92% of her students are nursing students or pre-nursing. They all were just notified that they didn't get into nursing upper division. It's nothing she is doing, it's this outside thing that is happening. But then it made us realize we need to have conversations with your students about other options, other things besides nursing, or what else they could be doing. So it's one of those things, it's like not something you might be doing, but something, another social, force coming into play. But it is one of those things to kind of sit there and think about your data and figure out what you can do to make changes. But again, this is data will not be given for any kind of evaluative purpose on faculty. Somebody asked me that the other day and I'm like, no.
But I think it was really nice, like after implementing it, to get like another perspective of the class, which we really sometimes don't think about. We always think about grades and how they're doing and performing and participation, but this really gives us another perspective. And that was really important for me to see, like, okay, how students are feeling in my class can I make them comfortable? And seeing it progressively throughout the course was really important. And I think like for all the interventions, sometimes we don't know which will affect which student. So having those small interventions throughout and being intentional about all the intervention was really important. And it took time also, like to think about, okay, what will I do in my class? When will I do? I think when we are talking about faculty getting involved, I think that time is also needed to think about like where we are implementing. And also like small interventions like the welcome message, that's where you are setting the tone with the class, right? And that's so important. Like it really drives like from where you are going, and then throughout the course where you are putting the syllabus and the others that Nadia and Dave was saying. I think all the interventions were kind of important, and it's nice to have in the class. But again, you also need to invest that time to put all those things in the class. And I think it's helpful, especially for the first two levels, but it can be useful for other courses as well.
Yeah, I've had the same experience. The welcome email that we send out at the beginning of the semester helps a lot. I've had some students actually come and say, I appreciate you sending out that email because I've been worried about this class. I've heard it's challenging, etc. So that definitely helps in the syllabus language for sure. The one thing that this semester and last semester that I've been struggling with in my class is that social connectedness issue. I know it's a problem overall. And, I do show that data to my students periodically and say, okay, what can we do about this? We have made some changes. So we switched from using Zoom to using GatherTown, but it's still been really hard to get students to talk to each other. In the class where they're in front of you, you can kind of make that happen much more easily. But in this setting, whether it's a Zoom breakout or a GatherTown table, it's still been hard. I'm wondering if anyone else has had better success with that social connectedness aspect.
I think I had the same experience as you, Harini, and also with the self-efficacy for our 12 students has been low. So those two I have really struggled with to like bring it up. Identity has been nice for my class, but yeah.
So Dave, why do you think biology had such a big impact from these SCP activities?
I think one of the biggest things is And there's and the Canvas site, there's a couple of examples of what they do. So the idea of exam wrappers, it started in the research, but then biology was already doing it. But then the constant sharing of the data back to the students made the students realize and increase their trust and fairness. And then they realized, okay, they're looking at this in a way to make it better for us as a student. But they would have an exam wrapper from the first exam, a pre one, they take the exam, the follow-up, what could you do? And they actually shared the data with the students and talked about it in class and then said, this is where, most people failed. So let's really go over these questions, and it was just kind of reiterating what the students were telling them, but doing it in a situation where they could all be there. And okay, they're doing this purposefully. It's not just, they're asking it and it's, pass, fail, whatever. So that was kind of one of the bigger things. I'm trying to think here what else. I mean, they've done quite a bit. They focus on so much of it. They also, in one of the situations where they had low social connectedness, they surveyed the students and asked them, like, would you rather do group work or not? And then they had it to where they did a group work project where the students were able to self-select. By doing they shared out a belonging story. The students all kind of talked about what their majors were intended to be. This is 150 students in a class on a discussion board, and then they could self-select into groups for the next discussion post. So they were then able to kind of start building up small teams and work with them across all the different, assignments, which it was a little bit more upfront work for the instructor to do the group work, but at the same time, it was less grading down the end because instead of having 150 single assignments, it was, I think, 50, assignments to grade. But really kind of thinking about and changing on the students' needs is one of the biggest things. They were taking the student feedback and making changes pretty quickly in their classes. I'm trying to think here some other ones that I've heard about. I'm trying to think here. I mean,
so basically, you think the big difference was that they worked more as a team of faculty to reflect on and share with their students rather than each person doing it individually.
Yeah, no. And a lot of the conversations happened in our monthly meetings and then some one-offs here and there, which in the math department this semester, we have it to where there's a lead for each of the math 1103, 1241, where they can kind of come to the big group, but then there's also, they have weekly, bi-weekly individual cohort meetings where I jump in occasionally. I've done it with ITSE to find out the individual needs, to try to think about things that we can focus on together. Yeah, in the fall, I think a lot of it was still learning and piloting things and having conversations about what's working, not working. I forget who it was. I think it might, I don't want to call out anybody's name, but having a situation even where a student has a Canvas image of their self of something that is racist, and it's kind of like, how do you deal with that? And it was one of those conversations that none of us knew, but we were able to figure it out. But it does turn into a community of practice of safe space for faculty to really understand what's happening in their class and realize it's not just you, it's everybody, to kind of figure out what we can do to best kind of fix the situations.
So I'm taking two messages, Dave, from what we heard. One is community of practice and safe space for learning from each other. And the second one is intentionality of student feedback. So we can do this as much as we want. If students don't know what we are doing, it's not going to resonate. It's not going to register. 90% of communication with students is oral communication. And we can improve the documents if we don't learn from what does the effect. It's unknown, right? So those are the two things. And also oral communication is the most difficult to analyze and understand, because all of us have some embedded microaggressions, whether we know it or not. All of us have different styles, and all of us tell students different things, knowingly and unknowingly. So you may have the best organized course and the best organized documents, and you still fail so many students, and there is no success, and there is no self-belonging and all of those things. I think that should be the emphasis on verbal communication. I mean, we start with others, but verbal communication and teamwork on following up on these initiatives.
I'm going to close it now and have Katie stop the recording, and we can move to thanking everyone for coming, because I don't want to run late. But thank you all for coming and sharing your thoughts. And